Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Always exciting.
And today we're going to be looking at Capital and Ideology
Oh, yes.
by Thomas Piketty.
Big one.
Now, Piketty, huge. Yeah, he's a pretty famous economist at this point.
Very much so.
He made a big splash with his book Capital a few years back.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
We'll be sure to link that one.
Definitely.
And all of his other books down in the description for you guys.
For sure.
But Capital and Ideology is kind of interesting.
Interesting in what way?
Well, for one, it's very expansive.
Expansive, how so?
Well, he's not just looking at, like, the West. Western Europe, America, that kind of thing.
Right.
He really takes a global perspective in this one.
So, like, where else is he looking at?
Well, he brings in data from Brazil, India, South Africa,
Wow.
all over the place.
That's a lot of data.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think what he's really trying to get at here
Okay.
is how different societies all across the world and throughout history have grappled with this question of inequality.
That's a big question.
Yeah, it's the why.
Right.
Not just that it exists.
Right.
But, like, what are the stories we tell ourselves
That's cool.
about why it exists?
Yeah.
Why it's okay that some people have so much
Right.
while other people have so little.
Like the justifications.
The justifications, yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, Andrew.
And one of the first things he does in this book
Right.
is he presents this really striking image.
Oh, an image. Okay.
Yeah, he calls it the elephant curve
Oh, the elephant curve.
of global income growth.
I see.
And essentially what this shows is that between 1980 and 2018,
Okay.
the bottom 50%
Bottom 50% of what?
of the global income distribution,
I see.
they only captured something like 12% of the growth
Oh, wow.
over that almost 40-year period.
So the world was getting richer,
Right.
but that bottom 50% weren't really seeing the benefits.
Yeah, they saw some benefits.
Right.
But a disproportionately small amount
Yeah. 12%, that's tiny.
versus the top 1%,
Yeah. How much did they get?
they captured something like 27%,
Wow. So almost like a quarter of all the growth in that entire period?
basically.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can kind of see why
Yeah.
globalization is such a controversial topic.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
Some people look at it and say,
Yeah.
oh, well, it's lifting people out of poverty,
Right.
which it is.
Yeah.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
we have this massive concentration of wealth at the top.
Absolutely. It's a double-edged sword.
It is.
Yeah.
And for you listening out there,
Yeah.
it's worth thinking about
Yeah.
where you fall on this curve
Right.
and how these global trends are impacting your own life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Makes you think.
Yeah, it's food for thought.
For sure.
But
Okay.
Piketty doesn't just leave us with the problem.
Okay. That's
He
good.
tries to, give us the framework for understanding it.
Okay. I like that.
And one of the first places he takes us
Where?
back in time
Oh, cool.
to what he calls ternary societies.
Ternary societies.
Yeah.
What are those?
So imagine a society
Okay.
that's structured around three main groups:
Okay.
the clergy, the nobility.
Oh, so like the church and the aristocracy.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
And then everyone else.
Got it.
And each of these groups
Okay.
has a designated role in society.
So like a divinely ordained role.
In a way, yeah.
Okay.
And these roles were used to justify why inequality was necessary.
Oh, I see. So the clergy has their role, the nobility has their role, the commoners have their role.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you couldn't really step outside of that role.
Or else what?
Well, Piketty actually mentions this medieval cleric
Oh, a cleric.
who warned against social groups exceeding their bounds.
So like trying to climb the social ladder?
Yeah, or even just,
That's-
questioning
Right.
why things were the way they were.
Yeah. So the system had to be maintained.
Yeah, it was a delicate balance,
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so different from how we think about things today
Oh, absolutely.
with social mobility
Right.
and all of that.
Yeah.
But even back then, people were pushing back against these systems.
Oh, really? So how?
Well, a great example is the French Revolution,
Yes, of course.
when they abolished the tithe,
The tithe.
which was the tax that supported the church.
Right.
It sparked this huge debate
Oh, about what?
about property rights
I see.
and compensation.
So like who should own what?
Exactly.
And who should be paid for what?
And it was this huge upheaval
Yeah, sounds like it.
because they were challenging
Yeah.
not just economic norms,
Right.
but like the entire foundation of society.
I see.
And, it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
could those same arguments about compensation
Yeah.
apply to modern day debates about wealth redistribution?
That's an interesting thought.
It's fascinating how these historical echoes
Right.
come through in these discussions.
Totally.
And from those ternary societies,
Yeah.
Piketty then traces how they evolved
Into what?
into what he calls ownership societies.
Ownership societies.
Yeah.
What are those?
Well, it's this shift where property rights become even more central and more strictly defined.
Interesting.
And he gives this example in France,
Okay.
where even getting rid of this one feudal payment,
Okay, what was it
it
called?
was called the Lod,
The Lod. Okay.
caused all this anxiety.
Because it was like messing with property rights.
Yeah, basically.
Yes,
So
it's-
even as they were dismantling these old systems,
Right.
they were still grappling with,
Yeah.
what does property ownership really mean?
In this new world.
Exactly.
I see.
And this brings us to the aristocracy.
Okay.
Piketty points out that in countries like the UK, Sweden, France,
Right.
you had this really small
Oh, okay.
but very concentrated nobility
Ah.
who held a huge amount of economic and political power.
So the fewer people controlled the wealth,
Right.
the more powerful they became.
Yeah, it seems like there's a correlation there.
It makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder
Yeah.
if we're seeing something similar happening today.
Oh, like a new concentration of wealth and power.
Exactly.
That is a good question.
Yeah, something to keep in mind
Yeah. We'll have to keep that in mind.
as we continue this deep dive.
Definitely.
But before we get there,
Okay.
we got to look at some even more
Or what?
extreme systems of inequality.
Oh, boy. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So we've been talking about these different systems of inequality,
Yeah.
from ternary societies to ownership societies.
Yeah.
But Piketty doesn't stop there.
He doesn't.
He takes us to some really dark places.
What do you mean?
Well, he wants to show us how inequality is played out on a global scale.
Okay.
And to do that, he takes us to places like
Like where?
the British and French West Indies
Oh, wow.
in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
back then in some of these colonies,
Yeah.
slaves made up something like 90% of the population.
90%. Wow. That's
Yeah.
almost everybody.
Yeah, it's hard to even fathom that level of
I know. It's just.
inequality.
Yeah.
And what's really striking is
Huh.
even when the debate about abolishing slavery was happening,
Okay.
like in France in the 1840s,
Yeah.
they were still worried about
About what?
compensating the slave owners.
Oh, wow.
So even when they were trying to get rid of this horrific system, this
Right.
idea of property rights was
Yeah.
still so central.
So central that they had to pay people for their slaves.
It's crazy, right?
I know.
And it shows how deeply ingrained
Yeah.
these ideas were.
Yeah.
Even when the property in question was...
Was another human being.
Yeah, exactly.
Disturbing.
It is, and it makes you think about,
Yeah.
the long-term effects
Yeah.
of those injustices
I
and
know.
how they might still be playing out today,
Oh, absolutely.
in terms of racial and economic disparities.
Yeah, it's something we can't ignore.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And to further explore,
Okay.
these different ways that societies have dealt with inequality,
Okay.
Piketty takes us to India.
India.
Yeah.
Okay.
And specifically, he looks at the caste system,
Oh, the caste system. Yeah.
which is really fascinating.
Yeah. Why?
Well, he compares it to
Compares it to what?
those ternary societies
Oh, right.
that we were talking about earlier.
With the clergy and the nobility and
good.
everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's this rigid hierarchy
Okay.
and religious justification.
Right. Like it's divinely ordained.
Exactly. But there's a key difference here.
Okay. What is it?
The Brahmin class in India.
Yeah. The top of the caste system.
Yeah, they're different from the clergy in Europe.
How so?
Well, for one thing, they're hereditary.
So like it's passed down through families?
Exactly.
Oh.
And they've accumulated wealth over generations.
Oh, wow.
So it's not just
Yeah.
their position in society.
Right. It's their family's history.
So challenging them would be even harder
Much harder.
because they have all this power and wealth behind them.
Exactly.
Right.
And then to make things even more complicated,
Even more complicated how?
British colonialism enters the picture.
Oh, British colonialism.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, during their rule,
Yeah,
the British actually codified caste identities.
they did.
Yeah. Which further solidified these inequalities.
Oh, wow. So they kind of made the caste system even more rigid.
In a way, yeah.
Wow.
And it just shows how,
Yeah.
inequality isn't just about internal systems,
Right.
but also external forces.
Like colonialism.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a good point.
And it makes you think about
Yeah.
how India can move forward
Right.
with this really complex legacy.
It's a tough question.
It is, for sure.
Sure.
Now, in the midst of all these examples
Uh-huh.
of deeply entrenched inequality,
Yeah.
Piketty also points to a period
A period of what?
where things actually got a lot better. Really? When was that?
The 20th century.
The 20th century, interesting.
Yeah.
What happened then?
Well, he talks about this dramatic reduction in income and wealth inequality,
Oh, wow.
particularly in Europe and the U.S.
So, like, things were getting more equal.
Yeah, for a while at least.
Interesting.
And it was a time of huge upheaval, obviously.
Oh, yeah, wars and revolutions.
Exactly.
Social movements.
But it was also a time of real progress.
So what drove that change?
It was a combination of factors.
Okay.
The collapse of private property between 1914 and 1945.
Because of the world wars?
Yeah.
Okay.
But also the rise of social democracies
Yeah.
and things like progressive taxation.
Oh, so like the rich paying more in taxes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it was radical at the time.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
And he also gives some cool examples
Cool example of what?
of how they reimagined power dynamics within companies.
Like what?
Well, in Germany and the Nordic countries,
Yeah.
they introduced co-management systems.
Co-management?
Yeah, so workers actually got representation on company boards.
Oh, wow. So they had a say in how the company was run.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
It's a different way of thinking
Yeah.
about power.
For sure.
And, the question is,
What's the question?
are those 20th century solutions still viable today?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's something to think about.
Yeah, because the world's changed a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
And that brings us to
So,
this concept that Piketty introduces,
what's it called?
hypercapitalism.
Hypercapitalism. Okay.
Yeah, and he sees this as
What?
kind of a new era of inequality.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's like we took a few steps forward,
Yeah.
and now we're taking a few steps back.
So inequality is on the rise again.
It seems like it.
It's when?
Well, he points to the 1980s as kind of a turning point.
The 80s, okay.
Yeah, and he argues that the fall of communism actually contributed to this.
Really? How so?
Well, it led to a kind of disillusionment
With what?
with alternative economic models.
Okay, so like people lost faith in anything other than capitalism?
Basically.
I see.
And there was this renewed emphasis on private property
Okay.
and free markets.
It's like the pendulum swung back the other way.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And this brings us to some of the big challenges we face today.
Like what?
The rise of tax havens.
Yeah, where the wealthy hide their money.
Exactly.
Okay.
And even the difficulty of measuring wealth inequality.
Oh, wow.
It's not just that the
Yeah.
rich are getting richer,
Right.
it's that it's hard to even know.
To know how much richer they're getting.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's tricky.
It is. And Piketty's research suggests
Suggests what?
that the wealthiest individuals and corporations,
Yeah.
they're getting really good
Good at what?
at hiding their assets
From tax?
from taxes, from scrutiny.
Wow. So it's like a whole hidden system.
In a way, yeah.
That's wild.
It is, and it has huge implications
Good for
inequality.
yes?
Yeah, so the question is,
What's the question?
are we headed towards
Towards what?
an even more unequal future?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
But what?
Piketty doesn't leave us without hope.
Okay, that's good.
He reminds us that inequality is not inevitable.
It's not.
No, it's a result of the choices we make
Oh, I see.
and the systems we create
Right.
and the stories we tell ourselves to justify those systems.
So we have the power to change things.
Exactly.
That's empowering.
Yeah. And by understanding
Yeah.
how different societies have dealt with inequality throughout history,
Yeah.
we can learn from their mistakes
Right.
and hopefully create
A better future.
a more just and equitable future.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you, the listener, come in.
Oh, okay. What do you mean?
What can we as individuals really do about this massive global problem of inequality?
Well, it starts with awareness.
Okay, so like understanding the problem.
Exactly like we've been doing in this deep dive.
Right.
Learning about these different systems, the
Yeah.
historical context.
The justifications.
Exactly.
Okay, so awareness is the first step.
Right. And then from there, I think it's about action.
Okay, so what kind of action?
Well, it can be big or small.
Okay.
It depends on your sphere of influence.
Right, like where you have power.
Exactly.
Okay.
So like in your workplace,
Yeah.
are there systems of inequality there?
Okay.
In your community?
Right.
Even in your own family?
Oh, wow.
These things exist everywhere.
Yeah, I guess so.
And then the next step is
Yeah.
asking yourself,
Okay.
what are the stories?
Stories.
Yeah, the stories that we tell ourselves
Okay.
to justify those systems.
Right.
Because those stories,
Yeah.
they're powerful.
Yeah, they can make us blind to the problem.
Exactly. And once you start to question those stories,
Yeah.
you can start to challenge them.
Okay. And how do we do that?
Well, it can be as simple as speaking up.
Oh, like having conversations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, having those difficult conversations.
Right.
Calling out injustice when you see it.
Yeah.
Supporting organizations that are working for change.
Right.
Voting for policies that promote equality.
So it's about using your voice and your actions.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be this huge grand gesture.
Okay.
Even small actions can make a difference.
Right, like ripples in a pond. At
Exactly.
least it's spread out.
Yeah, and collectively they can create real change.
Okay, so awareness, action, and hope.
Yeah, hope is important.
Because it can feel overwhelming.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like what can we as individuals really do?
But we have to remember
Yeah.
that change is possible.
Right. History shows us that
But exactly.
things can get better.
They can, and they have in the past.
Right.
So we have to keep fighting for a more just and equitable world.
I like that.
And, you know, speaking of fighting for change,
Yeah.
we highly recommend checking out
Yeah.
Capital and Ideology for yourself.
Piketty's book.
Yes, it's dense.
It is.
But it's so insightful.
It really is.
And you'll find links to purchase the book,
Okay.
along with some of Piketty's other works,
Awesome.
down in the description below.
Perfect.
And while you're down there,
Yeah.
leave us a comment.
Go
Let
on.
us know your thoughts on this deep dive.
Yeah, we want to hear from you.
What resonated with you?
What challenged you?
Exactly.
Yeah, let's keep this conversation going.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep diving deeper
Keep questioning.
and keep pushing for a more just and equitable world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.